It's something that I have to work on a lot, but it it changes my situation from, a situation that I would dread and try to avoid to a situation that I love, that I'm enjoying, that I want to be in. And that is that I chose this. I chose to be here. I choose to stay. I choose to look after my mom. I choose to help my dad out. I'm choosing all of it. And I could also look at it like, I have to do this. I need to do this. But that carries with it such a heaviness and such a pressure and such a feeling of being stuck. And I'm not stuck.
Welcome to the Sober Edge podcast, inspiration for alcohol-free living. I'm your host, Terry Patterson, functional nutritionist and This Naked Mind senior coach. The Sober Edge is a place to explore the infinite possibilities on the other side of drinking. In a culture soaked in booze, discover the wonder and joy of taking a different path. Meet real people living lives of purpose and passion, learn the truth behind the alcohol myths, and get ready to be motivated, inspired, and astounded by what is possible with the Sober Edge. Hello, it's Terry, and I'm excited to introduce this episode today. I get to catch up, and so do you, with my friend and colleague, Racquel Reid. When we first met Racquel, she had sold or was selling all of her belongings, leaving her home and traveling the world. And we catch up with Racquel where her circumstances look very different just 18 months later. However, what I love so much about this episode is the resilience and the optimism and the hopefulness you're going to hear woven throughout this story. Racquel reminds all of us as midlife women that we can choose and make an empowered choice about how we want to create our reality, how we want to live moving forward, and how beautiful and wild and free it can be. So I'm delighted for you to listen to this episode. I think you're going to be very inspired. So I also want to highlight a program that Racquel and we touch on this idea of midlife and alcohol and women. And I want to remind you that I have a program called Stop Drinking in Your 50s and Beyond. And this program is designed exclusively for women in this very place. So if you are 50, 60, 70 plus, I want you to consider taking a break from alcohol. I really do believe that it's critical in midlife for all women to explore the impact that alcohol might be having on your mental wellness, social wellness, physical wellness, emotional wellness. It's amazing how alcohol can start to show up as we go through these midlife transitions, as we experience menopause, and as we age, we are less able to metabolize the effects of alcohol. So I invite you to explore this program where you can lay the foundation to discover how to change your relationship with alcohol today and beyond. All the details are going to be in the show notes, but it is a self-paced, do-it-yourself program with optional coaching if you choose. It's something I'm very excited to share with you because I think it could be exactly what you need right now. All right, well, I'll see you over in the episode, and please share your feedback. I know Racquel would love to hear what this episode has meant to you. Hey, it's Terry back with another edition of the Sober Edge podcast. And today I've got my friend Racquel, who you may have met before, back on the podcast. So Racquel has been on a life-changing adventure and a life-affirming adventure since we last spoke. And so we're going to catch up today about her trip, not trip really, but your adventure where you spent, I think it was a year in a foreign country or foreign countries, and now you're back in a completely different role. So we're going to touch on all of that today, Racquel. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Terry. It's a pleasure to be back with you.
Yes. So when we last spoke, you were getting ready to sell all your possessions. You lived in Canada at the time, and you were going to travel for an extended period of time. Tell us about that time and just sort of in a little, vignette, give us the highlights of what happened during this time away and tell us how long you were gone.
Well, yes, I sold all of my belongings and moved into a suitcase and set out on my travels. So I traveled around Central and South America for a year. I was gone almost a year to the day, actually. And um, yeah, when I left, I was not an experienced traveler. I had only ever been to a few all-inclusive resorts, and I had definitely never traveled by myself. So that was it was something that took a big leap of faith in the universe and in myself. And I made it okay because after a year of travel, I was really kind of getting into my groove. And when I set out, I had planned to be gone for 2 to 2.5 years, I figured. And then I would come home, spend some time at home with my family. And during that 2.5 years, I had intended to fly my son at some point to meet me and spend some time with me. And then I was going to come home and spend some time with my family and then go back out for another year or two. And then that was going to be my life going forward. That was my plan.
Mm.
And after a year of travel, I found myself missing my family a lot more than I thought I would. My parents had become um, a little more vulnerable, a little faster than I thought they would, because they're aging. And at the time, my son was going through some stuff. So I thought this seems like the perfect time to come home. And that was what we're almost in June now, so I've been home 4 months, and I'll be home several more months before I leave again. So the whole game has shifted for me, and yeah, I don't know what the future will hold, but I'm pretty open to it.
Yes, and it's beautiful. And doesn't it to require that openness? And so I love that you were able to shift your plan and kind of lean into what was true for you. And I'm fascinated, Raquel, about the idea that you weren't a seasoned traveler. I assumed you were because I think my number one thing about traveling solo is kind of safety. And so I assumed, well, she's got it dialed in. She's probably done this a lot, but we talked about, this opportunity that you took as a way of learning to, so many of life's lessons from trusting yourself to letting things go more easily, certainly flexibility, and a lot of solitude. So, those lessons that you learned, how are they impacting you today?
Well, I think taking the step to go out and travel by yourself is a big leap of faith in yourself. And I honestly didn't know how it was going to turn out because when I say I was inexperienced, I was about as inexperienced as it gets when it came to traveling. Um, I don't, I can't think of a trip that I've taken that hasn't been in an all-inclusive type resort. That is not the kind of traveling that I did. I flew into countries and stayed in Airbnbs, and, just kind of lived amongst the locals. And I would stay like a month to 2 months in each place to kind of get a feel for the place, get to know my way around, get to know some people. And I've met like the most amazing people, both fellow travelers and people living in the local communities where I was staying. And I think some of the lessons that I've learned were like, I can remember the first country I went to was Costa Rica. And I chose Costa Rica very intentionally because Costa Rica seemed pretty westernized, and I thought that would be a safe place to land for someone who's as green as I am when it comes to travel. And then once I spend a couple months there, then I'll move on to some tougher countries. And from there, I went to Colombia. I went to Medellin, Colombia, that's like baptism by fire when it comes to travel. And in Costa Rica, I can remember like even in the first couple of weeks, I noticed a huge shift in myself. And that was starting to trust my intuition and even just learning to listen to my intuition, let alone trust it and like to connect with it. And I could feel my feet getting stronger underneath me as I went. And then I landed in Medellin, Colombia, and I was panicked again for entirely different reasons. Like I was in, this city which was once one of the most dangerous cities in the world. It is not anymore at all. But it is a place where you kind of have to have your wits about you. And, some people say it's for more experienced travelers. I wouldn't necessarily say that now because I definitely was not an experienced traveler and I did okay. And I ended up spending a total of 5 months in Medellin. Like I was back and forth a couple of times. But I fell in love with it. It's one of my favorite cities. And then from there, I went on to Ecuador, which was another completely different experience. I spent some time in the capital in Quito, and then I went on to a smaller city in the higher up in the mountains. Actually, I don't know technically it's the same elevation. But I went to another smaller city called Cuenca, which has a big expat community. So that was nice too, because Cuenca is both very traditional and yet there's a lot of Western vibe there as well. So
Mhm.
it's kind of a nice duality of both because it's maintained its traditional um, facades and culture. Yet you've got so many Americans that you don't feel, or Americans and Canadians and people from all over the world that you don't feel so out of place. You don't stand out quite as much as you do in other places. And I'm a fair-skinned graying redhead, so I stand out quite a bit in Central America. And yeah, it was like by the end of it, it was like and you and I've talked about this before. I kind of started to realize that wherever I am, I'm still me and I'm still gonna maintain that. So even though my surroundings completely shifted and completely changed every month or every couple of months, there was still consistency in how I lived my life and how I showed up in the world. And now that I'm back in Nova Scotia, Canada, staying with my parents, that consistency is maintained. So it's about, I learned to trust myself. I learned how to be grounded in myself and who I am. And I learned how to be or I learned how to feel really solid in
Mhm.
myself and
Mhm.
not because I recall feeling very, very shaky a lot of the time in who am I? What do I want? What am I really all about? And I think even though I knew deep down, I think as women, we morph into things that we think people want us to be.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I think I'm
Yeah.
done morphing now.
Oh, that's so cool. That's so cool. And, as you were saying that, I was thinking of that saying, "N wherever you go, there you are."
There you are.
And sometimes that can be frightening when we don't know who we are, when we don't know how to listen and discover and explore and settle into. I loved the saying that you said, the longer I was there, the more I felt solid under my feet, or I
Yeah.
felt however you said it was beautiful. But I got a picture of, oh, I'm starting to be rooted, not to a place, but to yourself, to that inner knowing. And for those who haven't met you before, Raquel, I forgot an important part of your story. And that is that you have been alcohol free and on this journey of discovering yourself without the veil of alcohol, without the numbing agent. For how long now? How long has it been for you?
Almost 13 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, as someone and not a seasoned traveler, not sure you knew exactly all of the ins and outs of who you were or becoming or what was next for you, knowing that you wanted something different, what were you hoping to get out of this experience of leaving everything behind and putting yourself in a new environment?
In some ways, I think exactly what I did get.
Mm.
Yeah. Like I think I set out to, you know, just kind of feel wild and free.
Mm.
And I do kind of, this is going to make me cry because I do feel very wild and free, even though some people might look at my situation at this moment in time and feel like she's not very wild and free, but I feel wild and free.
Mm.
So I think, and that came from um like screwing things up and figuring it out and having to depend solely on yourself to figure stuff out and spending a lot of time by myself and immersing myself in cultures where I didn't speak the language and having to communicate through broken Spanish and sign language and lots of smiles and handshakes and all kinds of things. But all of that just kind of gave me this foundation of, yes, I'm going to screw things up inevitably, and I will continue to do that, but it's going to be okay. And I can figure stuff out. Like, doesn't really matter what's thrown at me. I think I can figure my way out.
Yeah, and it's such a beautiful segue of that wild and free because, as you said, you're in a completely different circumstance. But
Yeah.
you and I talked before we hit record that when you really are in this grounded place and this place may be a feeling wild and free, the circumstance doesn't really have as much impact as it may for those of us that are feeling a little more uncertain or untethered. So tell us why you came back to Canada and what your life looks like right now.
So I came back to Canada back in February, and because my parents, well, one, I was missing my family. I didn't realize how hard the holidays would be alone. I had never, trying to remember, I don't think I've ever spent the holidays alone. I've either had my family or my son. So this was a first for me, and I really didn't think it would bother me, and it did. I really missed my family over the holidays. And then over the next couple of months, I was up in the air where I was going to go. I was going to go meet a friend in Ecuador. She was staying in Ecuador. So I was going to go stay with her or stay in the same city as her for a while to hang out with her. But then there were some political things going on in Ecuador, and I kind of gave it a second thought. And then I was talking to my son one day, and I was like, I don't really know where I want to go next, but I have to buy tickets soon, or they're going to be too expensive to go anywhere. And I had to get out of Colombia because my tourist visa was expiring. So I had to be out of Colombia by a certain date. And that was fast approaching. And he said, why don't you just come home? And it would have been the dead of winter in Nova Scotia. And I didn't own a pair of long pants. And I thought to myself, well, what the hell? Like, why not go home? And my parents, they had become a bit more vulnerable than I thought they would, faster than I thought they would. So I thought this seems like a perfect time to just kind of go home and check in and reassure myself that everything's okay and, maybe get some things on track and that sort of thing for my family and for my son. And so I arrived home with the intent of staying at least a month, probably 2 months, and then going back out on the road. And it's been 4 months, and I'm absolutely loving it.
Mm.
And I'm now pretty much a full-time caregiver for my mom and partially for my dad. My son he's figured out all his own stuff. He didn't need my help with that. I like to think that him just knowing I was here in the province was helpful.
Yes.
But maybe that's even taking too much credit. So he figured out all of his stuff. So he's in a really good place. And yeah, it's like if someone had said to me, like, prior to selling it all and going away, if someone had said to me, you need to move to where your parents live and go live with them and be with them for a while. I would have fought that like kicking and screaming. Even though I love them, I just didn't wouldn't possibly have seen how that could possibly work out to benefit anybody involved. Me living with my parents, because as you and I talked about earlier, like when you're with family, it kind of like family has a special way of pressing buttons you'd forgotten that you had, bringing out insecurities, bringing up negative behavior patterns that you thought you've kind of let go of. Like you can do all this personal development in the world, and then when you're around your family, that can all go to shit pretty damn quick,
Yes.
unless you're grounded in yourself, unless you're solid in yourself, because I've seen it go the other way with my family. But this time it's not that's not happening. Like I still get like, the buttons still get pushed, of course, but now it's like I'm of a mindset where I'm here to be of service. I'm here to be helpful. I'm not here to be judgmental. I'm not here to be um annoyed at certain behaviors or certain things that they say or ways that they are. I'm here to be helpful and changing from when I get triggered, though I really don't like that word, when I get whatever, we'll say triggered. When I get triggered, changing into the mindset of I'm here to be helpful completely changes my perspective. And whatever button was pushed in the first place, I like you just forget about it. It's not important. It's not significant. Like, how can I be of service in this moment? How can I be helpful in this moment? Things
Yeah,
like that
you
remind me.
said something really powerful and you said, "Oh, I'm loving it." And I don't know if you heard yourself say that. I'm loving being here. And, I work with a lot of women in midlife. And I guess technically maybe at 63, I'm a little on the other side of midlife, but I like to think I'm still, just in the middle of my life. Maybe I'll live to be 126. So I'm only
You
halfway
might.
there. And so, what I see so often is that these midlife transitions that we go through, be
Mhm.
they empty nest, retirement, maybe a gray divorce, maybe a scary health diagnosis, and often caregiving of our elderly parents. We often get this feeling of overwhelm that these things are happening to us and they're out of our control. They're not something we chose. And what is so beautiful about your evolution and this place where you have now arrived or you are spending time is this understanding that I get to be here as a choice, that empowered choice. So, will you talk about that mindset a little bit? Because I think it's so helpful to open up this possibility for all of us.
It's it's something that I have to work on a lot, but it it changes my situation from a situation that I would dread and try to avoid to a situation that I love, that I'm enjoying, that I want to be in. And that is that I chose this. I chose to be here. I choose to stay. I choose to look after my mom. I choose to help my dad out. I'm choosing all of it. And I could also look at it like I have to do this. I need to do this. But that carries with it such a heaviness and such a pressure and such a feeling of being stuck. And I'm not stuck. Like I'm really not. They could hire a caregiver and I could leave. That would be a choice. But I'm choosing to stay here and I'm choosing to spend this time with my mom. My mother and I have not spent this much one-on-one time together since I was a child.
Yeah.
Because there's always been other siblings and then my son and I haven't lived in the same. I've always lived like about 2 hours away from my parents. So since I left home in my early, I don't even know, 20s maybe. Um so it's always ever been like a weekend trip home. So I've never spent this amount of time with her. So it's like I'm getting to know my mom again in a whole new way. And I'm getting to know my dad again in a whole new way. And yes, they have their moments and their quirks and whatnots, but they're pretty damn special too. Like getting to know them this way has been really beautiful. And even my sister and I had kind of a strenuous relationship. We are very, very different and not necessarily in complementary ways. And um, so even with her, like she lives in the same town here with my parents. So I'm spending far more time with her than I have in years. So our relationship is growing and our relationship is building in a way that I never foresaw it would. Like I never anticipated that it would. So like I look at it now, like it's a gift and it's a privilege. And that sound may sound like a little wishy-washy, but it isn't because it really is a gift and a privilege to be here and to be doing this for them. And I can, if it doesn't continue to feel like a gift and a privilege, I can choose to do something different.
Yeah. And what you're talking about that I think is also part of this is when we fall into that, I need to, or I should, or I have to, that's often a place of resentment or where resentment can start to build. And once we have resentment, we have to really back out of that carefully, or it can be very insidious. And so by leaving this open-ended around the choice, and you and I talked, I think we limit ourselves so often saying, well, I could never do that, or that's not possible, or I have to do this. I can't sell all my possessions and travel around the world. Oh, yeah? Racquel did. And so I think it's so important to discover for each of us what that place is of allowing versus feeling forced.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what you just said, I can't sell all my possessions and travel around the world. Well, you can. But do you
Yes.
want to?
Yes.
And if you want to, what is holding you back from doing it? And are they reasons or are they excuses? Like you have to really break it down because that is exactly what I had to do because I had a want to do this, but didn't think that I could, then started to break it down and realized, oh, actually I can. But. And then I looked at the but, and realized those are just excuses. They're not reasons. I have no reason holding me back from this. And some people do have legitimate reasons why selling all of their belongings and going out traveling alone is not the best choice for them. Something else would be a better choice for them. Right now, that isn't the best choice for me because I would feel like if I chose to do that right now, I would feel like I'm detaching from my family and I don't want to detach from them. So, yeah, I mean you have to figure out you can do it because there's so much that we can do that we don't think that we can do. Like we don't give ourselves nearly enough credit. And sometimes you need to just jump off the deep end and figure it out and screw it up and figure it out and it will be okay. And then you have to look at, do you really want that? Like, don't do it just because you think it's a grand idea. Like,
Yes,
do,
yes.
do you
When
really want?
How many women did that after reading Eat, Love, Pray, right? And they were
Right?
like, Eat, Pray, Love, and they were like, uh-oh, maybe I didn't really want to do that. It reminds me of this saying. So I interview a lot of authors on the podcast, and a couple of them have said to me recently, do you want to write a book or do you want to have written a book? Because the writing of the book is arduous and it's challenging and it's time consuming. And in so many ways, it can be thankless and it can be frustrating. And at the end, you have a book. And we think that with the publishing of the book comes accolades and entry into certain realms. And so I think it's really important, as you're saying here, Raquel, to think about what is the feeling that I want to get from traveling around, selling all my possessions and traveling around the world. And for you, it was to feel wild and free. And
Yeah.
so once we know what it is we're seeking, there might be many avenues to that. And for some of us, it can be a slow progression toward eventually selling all our possessions and traveling the world. And I think for me, I had a small experience last year. So I was invited by a former client and now friend to go to a very special retreat and wellness experience. And it was a week away at a beautiful place called Rancho La Puerta. And it's not like the high-end Golden Door experience of spas. It was more rustic, but it was also in my mind's eye, I had always aspired to someday, but I never thought that someday was very realistic. And so when this opportunity presented myself, there were certainly obstacles of going away for a week by myself. It was in Mexico. I was going with my friend, but I wasn't going with my family. I was taking a significant amount of time and money to go alone. And so there was a part of me that felt selfish. There was a part of me that felt undeserving. And so I had to lean into that and explore, like, what would be holding me back? Like, this is an opportunity of a lifetime. It may never come again. What is holding me back? And so the ability to feel deserving and to feel, this place of expansion around what is possible for me, to be somebody who goes to these wellness retreats, to experience all of that, to have this golden opportunity. I had to really explore, like, that's the feeling I'm looking for. And so for some people, it may be traveling brings them that expansiveness, that sense of deserving, that sense of adventure. And I got that from a week. So I made a little
Yeah.
inroads there. But it's, once we know that feeling, that identity that we're looking for, we can follow that. That's the through line, I think.
Yeah, I love that. Once you know it, just follow it and be open to it and just kind of like, you know, well, whenever I think wild and free, I see a woman dancing in the grass, barefoot in the grass. And you don't need to go to another country to do that.
True.
You can do that in your backyard. I could go out and do that right now and feel very wild and free. And so I can sit here and talk to you and feel very wild and free. But it's kind of like an essence that I've nurtured. It's always been there. I didn't create it. It's always been there. So it's kind of this essence that I have nurtured and strengthened over the past couple of years of my life. And now she's just there and she's with me all the time. Even when I'm sitting here being interviewed on a podcast, she's there. When I'm out in the grass barefoot, she's there, It doesn't matter. She's always there. And yeah, it's, you talked earlier about people getting, or we talked about people getting stuck. And it takes me back to times in my life when I have felt very, very stuck. Before I sold all of my stuff and left, I kind of felt a little stuck in a life that was expected of me, but not, and designed by me, but not designed for me. Like, I made all the choices in the life that I had. So I created the life that I had, but I didn't create it for me. I created it for, for societal expectations. I created it for my son. I created it because that's just what people do. That's what's expected of you. It wasn't the life that I wanted. And when I left, and you also brought up about how selfish you felt about going away by yourself for a week.
Mhm.
Well, imagine how you'd feel if you were going away indefinitely by yourself and leaving my son. My son was 23 years old when I left, so he was self-sufficient. He could take care of himself, but we're pretty close. And the idea of not seeing him for possibly a year or more was heartbreaking to me. And I felt extremely selfish. And it was a woman who we both know. We mentioned her earlier, um, that lovely, wise woman that we know. And she kind of helped me reframe it so that how can I not go? Like, how can I not show him to trust in yourself, to take the big leaps and go after what you really want? Like, that is a lesson in life that you can't tell someone, you have to show them.
Mm.
And so I think, and, you know, he probably wouldn't admit it now, but there, I have the text messages. So I have the proof that he did send me a couple of text messages when I was away telling me how inspiring I was to him
Mm.
and
Mm.
what an example I set to him and how to live life. So that, the job was done in that respect.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Oh,
that eased up on the selfishness feelings.
yes. Yeah, and this entire conversation is really it kind of reminds me of that bloom where you're planted. And I think the planting part is what you talked about. Like here I am with my be where your feet are, I think is another way of thinking about it. So,
Yeah.
being rooted, feeling solid in your identity, your self trust, your self worth, your expansiveness, your opportunities, all of that. And it's not until we're planted that we can really bloom. And I recently wrote in my newsletter to my listeners and audience around the spirit of discontent. And I had a spirit of discontent for a long time. And I didn't realize that some of that was from the drinking. Some of that was from not leaning into discovering who I really was. I think, I sort of fell into drinking. And then what happened for me was the drinking and over drinking stunted my own personal growth. And
Mm.
exactly what you said there, Raquel, in one of my courses, I use the phrase, live your life by design, not by default. And so what you're saying, what you said about design, I designed the life. It was designed by me, but not for me. And so I think that
Yeah.
often I think of that as saying, that life for me was default. Like it was expected. It just happened. There was choices, but there was also a lot of settling and going along and following with what society and culture told us was the next right step. And you just became such a disruptor in your own life when you said, poof, there goes that life. I'm going to do something completely different and way outside of what's expected of a woman in midlife. Like how brave.
I experienced a lot of resistance,
Mm.
not from myself. Well, I had my own sense of resistance for myself, but I worked through that because when I made the decision to do this, it was literally like the path in front of me opened up. And it was almost spiritual the way that it happened once I made the decision to do this. And then, and for, because I spent 9 months preparing, selling all of my belongings, getting ready to go. And in that 9 months, I'm going to say the first 3 months were like easy peasy gravy. Like it was just wonderful. It was like, oh my God, the universe is making this happen. This is amazing. And then the bumps started being thrown in and, speed bumps, rocks, boulders, mountains. And I had to just maneuver around it. But I kept my sight on the path that I wanted in front of me, that I had laid out, that I had put in motion. And yeah, and all of these speed bumps and that was resistance and much of it from other people who they were scared for me. And
Mm.
I understand that. And they were scared, not only for me, but they were scared for themselves
Tell me more.
in some way. Well, I think that when, and I've even had girlfriends say this pretty openly to me, like, you showing me that you can do this kind of makes me feel small because I don't feel like I can do it.
Mhm.
And then I've had the opposite. And they worked through that on their own. And they worked through and came to a point where now I don't feel so small because now I see you doing this. And now I'm inspired by you. And I think, well, maybe I can go to the movies by myself. Maybe I can take myself out to dinner. Maybe I can take myself to a cabin for the weekend. Like, it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't have to be a plane ticket across oceans. It can be, a weekend drive to the country by yourself, go on a hiking trip by yourself. Like, it really doesn't matter. And have a friend a very dear friend who, he said I inspired him so much because he had, didn't really do much of anything by himself. Just didn't feel he had the confidence to do things by himself. So there were lots of things he wanted to do, but would always wait for someone to do them with. And one day he went on a day trip by himself. And he said he woke up one day and he knew I was in Bogota, Colombia. And he said, I think it was Bogota. And he said, I knew you were over there by yourself. So there's no way I couldn't do this by myself. So he drove to the next town and spent the day like just by himself shopping and having lunch and ended up meeting the love of his life.
Oh
And
my.
they had known each other in the past and they're kind of reunited. So yeah, the two of them have been together for a while now and it's beautiful. And he says, and if it wasn't for you, I never would have gone and done that by myself. I
Well, we
never would
think
have
of
run
the
into that.
opportunities missed when
Yeah.
we allow resistance to impede our way. And
Yeah.
I think sometimes resistance is just a message that something is showing up that we need to explore. It's not a no.
Mhm.
It's not necessarily a no. I mean, maybe sometimes, but I think that's such a cool story because it just shows that getting out of our comfort zone is the hardest part. What's on the other side often is that beautiful love of your life, the ease, the wild and free, the understanding of the empowered choice, the loving where you're at no matter the circumstances. And it's such a beautiful evolution. And so that's why I really wanted to have this conversation. And one thing you said there, I can't let go, Raquel, is when you said that the reason that some other people they were threatened by your leaping off into the unknown because it made them feel small reminds me so much of the alcohol freedom story for many of us. We we have this experience where we no longer drink and people are resistant. Come back and drink with me. Don't do that thing. You're leaving. You're going over there. What will our relationship be like? This is showing me that I'm playing small when things could open up for me too if I was to explore this relationship with alcohol. And so it's fascinating that it's not just around alcohol or these choices that we make. It's very much a response to people when we step into our own power and our own light. And yet, if people don't do that, if the Raquels don't go first, we don't have the opportunity to see that model, to see the beauty of it, to see the possibility. And that's that place where I think of the lighthouse. You know, we are shining out for people to say, hey, I am here spreading the light so that you too can see what's possible.
It's I love that. When you were saying that, I thought of that saying, don't dim your light and don't let others dim your light. When you step into your power and your light, it gets brighter and then it sheds light on other people's who have possibly dimmed their own lights.
Mm.
And that can be really scary. And at the same time, like really freaking beautiful.
Yes, and freeing and wild.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you so much for sharing this. And I'm so honored to have you here with my audience, kind of telling us the next chapter in this story. I don't think this is our last conversation on the podcast, Racquel, because this place that you are with caregiving is another unknown. And I
Yeah.
think that you venturing off into the unknown and learning to trust yourself is the exact experience you're going through now. This is unknown territory. You are having to trust. You're having to lean into your mindset. You're having to reframe. You're having to take time alone and explore and trust yourself all over again. And from that, you've found this beautiful place of loving right where you're at. So I know there's going to be more to the story. So tell my listeners where they can connect with you. And you have a very special free offer. So tell us about that.
Yes. So listeners can connect with me on my website, which is racquelreid.com. And on Instagram, they'll find me at Alcohol Free Nomad Coach.
Ooh.
Um, and I do have a free 4-week course that people can pop onto my website and sign up for. And I'll send you the link so you can drop that in the show notes. It's called Rise, and it's about, it is designed specifically for alcohol-free women, newly alcohol-free women, but not, it's designed with them in mind, but it's not only for alcohol-free women. It's like, I'd love for every woman to do a course like this because it's what I did. Like, it's the process that I went through to get where I am with myself, not in life, but just with myself. And so it's a 4-week course, and I call it like it's a foundational course of getting grounded in yourself, learning to trust yourself, and learning to kind of just have faith that you'll grow into what you were meant to grow into.
I love the name Rise.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. And I agree. I think we don't spend enough time honing the skills that we need to move through life with less resistance, less fear. And we can all use a helping hand along the way. So I'm going to link those in the show notes. And please take Racquel's course and get your own version of how to become wild and free, or more wild and more free, and dance in the grass. I'm going to go do that after this, Racquel.
I might go change the subheading for that course now, how to be wild and free and dance in the grass.
I love it. Yes. And I'm thinking that this podcast episode name is going to be Wild and Free with Racquel Reid. So thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Cherry. Pleasure as always.
I want to thank you for tuning in to the Sober Edge podcast. This is a place for important conversations and a safe place to question everything you thought you knew about drinking. If you're looking for your sober edge, I want to invite you to connect with me at thesobernutritionist.com, where you can grab my free resource, Becoming More, a guide to loving your sober life. And I would be so grateful if you enjoyed this podcast, if you would leave a rating and review, as it will help more people find their sober edge.